Good morning.
Morning, morning.
Time, what's that song? It's time for Bible class. It's time for Bible class. Did y'all sing that
Nope,
when you were 2? Okay.
I didn't. I guess we didn't like Bible class.
I guess not. Well, it's time for Bible class. So here we are. The joke fell flat, didn't it? We'll make up for it. So this morning we're going to be finishing our study of James. Like we've talked about in recent weeks, so much of what we've been looking at has been really in harmony with the other things that we've been exploring these last few months. Now working into Romans.
Yeah.
And got to talk about, this past Sunday night, got to talk about a little bit about judgment, but mostly about your faith being in action and not based just on knowledge. And of course, we talked about James is very practical in what he has to say. And so much of James' focus is you got to demonstrate your faith with what you do.
Definitely.
And so really, as we work through some of these studies, we're really getting to see how not just the text that we're selecting to study, but the whole of the New Testament works together and feeds into the idea that we love God and we do that by loving other people,
right,
in so many ways.
Yeah.
So we're going to start working through James chapter 5. Verse 1 says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasure in the last days. Indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord of the Sabbath. You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury. You have fattened your hearts as in the day of slaughter. You have condemned, you have murdered the just. He does not resist you." So, once again, James
Kind of says it like it is. I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
Puts it out there for him.
He's that, I think we mentioned this one week, at least I thought of it. He's that individual in your life that's sometimes like an old uncle or an old aunt that will just tell you like it is.
Yeah.
Say, Jake, your hair looks bad. You know?
You need those people every once in a while, I guess.
Yeah. Jake, be better to Rachel, right?
Right.
You need people that'll tell you honest opinions about what you're doing, and here James is. I love where he says, verse 3, "Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you, and will eat your flesh like fire." So what is it that James is getting into here? You know, part of what he's talked about in the context of the rest of the text is the idea of focusing on the spiritual and not on the physical. And we take from this the idea of "come now, you rich, weep." Is the idea that not only are these people who have material blessings, but these are people who value, above all else, their material possessions, even to the point they will cheat others to either grow their possessions or maintain what they have.
Yeah, their joy and their pleasure is not in the Lord, it's in their possessions because of all they've been able to obtain. The idea that, how does he claim it? You've lived luxurious on the earth and led a life of wanton pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. It's like, this is the time that you're supposed to be sacrificing for the goodness of the Lord, and you have not been sacrificing. You've actually been doing the opposite. You've been fattening yourselves, your hearts up with things that are not supposed to be filling your heart.
Yep. If you were either here or on the live stream with us on Sunday night, you know, we talked about Romans 2, and I touched on this very briefly. But Romans 2, Paul goes into, are we doing the things that we're speaking against? And he uses the example of, you who preach not to steal, are you stealing? And we often think of stealing as being very, you know, I see something in somebody's window, I'm going to crawl in there and get it.
Yeah.
And the Old Testament writers and prophets would argue that that's not what the stealing that the Jews were struggling with. And I had 2 textual references for that. Proverbs 11, verse 1 says, "Dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but the just weight is his delight." So that idea that, much like what James is accusing of holding back earned wages, someone who cheats in the marketplace by by changing the weight on their scales, right? You're paying for more grain than they're actually getting. Amos speaks to this a little more specifically. This is Amos chapter 8. He says in verse 1, "Thus the Lord showed me, behold, a basket of summer fruit. And he said, Amos, what do you see? So I said, a basket of summer fruit. Then the Lord said to me, the end has come upon my people Israel. I will not pass by them any more, and the songs to the temple shall be a wailing in that day, says the Lord. Many dead bodies everywhere, they shall be thrown out in silence. Hear this, you who swallow up the needy, and make the poor of the land fail, saying, when will the new moon be passed, that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath that we may trade wheat, making an ephah small and a shekel large, falsifying the scales by deceit, that we might buy the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, even sell the bad wheat." God's telling Amos, he's showing this vision. He says, I am passing by the children. I'm leaving them behind. And it's because, in this text, because they are mistreating the poor. Mm-hmm. They're saying, hey, when can we have this religious observance, the Sabbath, the new moon, so that we can sell bad wheat, so that we can buy the poor for nothing? And so this is something that, as we have recorded, and it's in other places in the Old Testament, those are just two references, but as we have it recorded in the Old Testament, something that the Jews struggled with, right, is being honest and being true and good to the poor. What was Jesus so often attacked for? Spending time with the poor and the friend. It wasn't just that they were poor. Oftentimes it was that they were in a lifestyle that the Pharisees pointed out that Jesus shouldn't be hanging out with them.
Yeah.
But ultimately it was that they were on the fringes. They were poor. They were destitute. And James is saying, look, you people who cheat the poor, you've got your reward coming, right? And it's going to be judgment, and a judgment of fire that's going to be cried out against you on behalf of your possessions.
Yeah.
Verse 7, back in James 5. "Therefore be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and the later rain. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. My brethren, take the prophets, who spoke in the name of the Lord, as an example of suffering and patience. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You have heard of the perseverance of Job, and seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. But above all, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, lest you fall into judgment."
You know, kind of the reoccurring theme in many of Jesus' teachings and going into Paul is this idea of patience. And we've talked about it a lot, even with Solomon and different things, is when you talk about patience, why it's so important is patience is the thing that doesn't end. Like once you stop, when you become impatient, it's not like you're less patient, you're not patient at all. It's either you are or you're not patient. And patience is so important because, as he's saying, as we're patient in the coming of the Lord, we take, as the farmer waits the precious produce, I mean, the soil is supposed to be producing in this time, and we want that to be able to happen, and sometimes that takes the patience that he's speaking of for things to happen the way that we want, or maybe not even the way we want them to happen, or the way that they should happen. Mm-hmm. They don't always just happen right in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Just after coming out of talking about the rich, and specifically the rich who put their faith in God, or who put their faith in their riches and not in God, he comes into this idea of being patient through being tried, being patient through being persecuted.
Yeah.
In James chapter 2, which was what we studied a few weeks back, it's verse 6, "Do not the rich oppress you and drag you into the courts?"
Yeah.
Right? So in that context, he's talking about favoring someone who comes into the assembly who has got the trappings of life, as opposed to someone who is poor and on the outskirts of society. But James has given us this idea of look, the rich are going to be judged for what they're doing. They're cheating some of you, maybe. You've gone to work for them, you've helped mow, you've helped reap and harvest, and they're cheating you. But you know what? Their judgment's coming. You've got to be patient in the faith that you have. Have the patience of Job. And I like what he says with regards to Job. And I've lost the verse.
11.
In 11. Intended, yes. So, verse 11, indeed we count them blessed who endure. You've heard of the perseverance of Job and seen the end intended by the Lord. And that's the part I wanted to point out. God knew what he was doing with Job. God knew that Job was faithful. God knew that while Satan could touch him and harm him, that it wasn't going to detract from Job's faith. And it was the end that God intended for Job, that he would remain faithful, and ultimately that God would reward him for that. Now, in Job's case, that reward was very physical, right? Job came away with more than what he lost.
Yeah.
What James is arguing is we have the same type of reward that Job got in a spiritual sense, right?
Yeah.
It's not guaranteeing that we're going to be oppressed by people and at some point we're going to have 1,000 camels, though I have no need for 1,000 camels. That benefited Job more than it would have me. But that we're going to have this spiritual reward that far exceeds what God intended for Job to have at the end of his trial.
Right, because, I mean, how he ends that, it says the Lord is, what you'll see in the end of these dealings is the Lord is full of compassion and is merciful. Many times, whenever they're seeing people reap benefits, the rich reap benefits when they're not devoting themselves in the way that they are to the Lord, he says that's what you're patient in seeing these things happening for other people and not losing heart, because what you know is the Lord keeps his promises, which we're going to get into in a minute, but also that the mercy and compassion that comes from the Lord will overwhelm you in the end.
And
go ahead. No,
I was saying, and backing up a little bit to verse 9, do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. Making sure that we have patience with everyone in all things, right? We're talking about judgment on Wednesday nights. I hope you've been able to join us on those studies. Yeah. Steve is now taking us through 2 studies on that. Being able to be patient with those within our fellowship and those who have not been added to the church. We talked about that last week from the perspective of Paul, how he addresses that in Romans and Corinthians. And the idea that it's on us to have that patience, knowing that the real judge, as James says, is standing at the door. He's not far from us. Judgment is not far from us. Now, in our time scale, it can feel that way. And for those who James is writing to who've been oppressed, maybe been oppressed by the rich, been oppressed by those who want to dampen the way and mute the gospel, it doesn't feel like at times that God is standing at the door to judge. But in God's time, that's what he's doing. Yeah. He's waiting. He's allowing things to run their course. He's having his will to be done, ultimately knowing that he's going to come in and judge the world. And those who are found in good standing with him and who have been patient and have endured tribulation will be rewarded like Job was rewarded.
You know, we talk about oftentimes how, James is sending this to, mainly the Jewish Christians who have been scattered about, and the reputation James has with those people. And something that he does continually through this that I think helps us relate so much to the letter that James has written is that you can take the words, and as you look at verse 12, but above all, my brethren, do not swear by either heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but your yes is to be yes and your no to be no, so that you may not fall under judgment. You can trace that exactly back into the Sermon on the Mount teachings of Jesus. And there's several points in this letter that we have looked and been able to take directly back into the Sermon on the Mount teachings of Jesus. And it's almost easy for us to, when we're getting ready to teach a class or do a sermon, we find these passages and we build it around these passages. And you can almost see that James in his letter is taking the first words of Jesus' ministry to the mass people and bringing those out and compounding upon those things in the same way that we do. And it's evident in several places, but especially here in 12, where he almost use the exact words that Jesus used is about keeping your oath, and that it's not, you shouldn't have to put all these guarantees on your word for you to keep it. Your yes or your no should be the guarantee without anything else put on top of it.
Yep. As attested to by the life that you lead to the people
Yeah.
that you're speaking to, right?
Exactly.
Before this Wednesday night series on judgment, we spent time on words with friends, as it was tagged, right? 4 weeks on that. How we communicate, what our words, the weight they carry.
Yeah.
So much of the reason we feel it necessary to say, well, I guarantee you I'm going to make this happen, or I promise this, or I want to swear by God, or something like that, is because we feel like that just our word alone saying, yes, it will be done, is going to be doubted.
Yeah.
But if we live our lives the way that James is arguing we ought to live and that Jesus presented to us, that's not going to be something we have to consider, because when we say, yes, it will be done, or no, it won't be done, we will carry through with that action, and that word will stand on its own merit.
And one thing I think we maybe do a disjustice to of this verse specifically, and James using it, is oftentimes, when you're reading your Bible and there's sections of different things, we separate it as kind of a standalone sentence here, which doesn't make sense. Why would James be writing the sentence and then all of a sudden just be like, oh, and you remember, keep your word, Because what he is about to go into, all of these things are so important that if you're going to participate in what he's about to list, that it be known that your word is trustworthy. What you said, your actions can be trusted and to be honorable in the sight of God. Because it takes a lot of these things that we're about to go to, takes a lot of faith in believing in who Jesus is going forward and how he's telling them to take care of each other. So you read 12, realize just how much of a precursor that is to what he's about to call them to do at the end of his letter here.
Mm-hmm. Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing psalms. Is anyone among you sick? Let him call on the elders of the church, and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith will save the sick, and the Lord will raise him up. And if he has committed sins, he will be forgiven. Confess your trespasses to one another, and pray for one another that you may be healed. The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain. And it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth produced its fruit. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins.
There's a few things that jump out, and some of these verses are my favorite verses to read and share with people, because there's just so much wisdom and trust in God in all of these things. Is anyone among you suffering? He's got to pray. I mean, the idea that you don't have to do anything else isn't there, but the fact that if you're suffering, prayer has to be a part of it, in that trust in God, because most of the time we suffer because we have distanced ourselves from God, or something has put distance in. Sometimes it's not us. Something has put distance between us and God, and we need to find comfort when we're suffering. And the comfort that heals is the comfort that comes from God that we've been studying on for so long. If anyone among you cheerful, sing praises.
And not to maybe you weren't going to, not to blow past sing praises when you're cheerful, right? That's something that I don't know that I adopt in my life. The times are tough, I need to pray. That's pretty easily adopted. But when I'm having a good moment, a moment when I feel God in my life, a moment when I feel like we are being blessed with his word and blessed physically with our family, do I sing about it? Do I sing praises to him because of those things? And
it's almost in accordance with verse 12 and being truthful and honorable and all those things. It's almost like understanding this has got to be your natural reaction to these things. Like, if you trust in God, this should be your natural reaction. This is what tells God that you're truthful in these things. This is how you tell people that you trust in God. Not that you have to swear by anything, but by the way you say that you do, and then your actions reflect that you do. Like, if you're suffering, you don't say you trust in God and then go search all these other things. If you're suffering, above all, you let people know that your trust in God is there by the way that you pray to him. If you found joy, you don't just go and celebrate and party the way you want to, you're giving thanks to God through it. You're singing praises to Him, that understand He is the one who has blessed you. Mm-hmm. It just goes into that thing of making sure your actions are reflecting your word. And that's what's more important. Not using more words to justify your stance and trust in Jesus, but your actions then proving it instead of having to use oaths and swearing by it.
Mm-hmm. Is anyone among you sick? Let him call the elders of the church. I can say we have an eldership mm-hmm. who cares so much for the flock, both spiritually and physically, who prays daily, weekly with those individuals needing prayers. They come together as a group to pray over those who are struggling, both physically, whether it be with a sickness or with something in their lives that's taking hold of them that they need help with the burden of. And we are so blessed with that leadership that we have and that example that we have.
And kind of the understanding of, something special, and most of you guys know that this happens, but every week our elders, when we meet together as ministers and elders, the elders talk about every single person that's been brought to them that have, like Jake said, has something going on, whether it be sickness or something in their lives. And they pray over them, but they also write a card to let them know we're praying over you. Like, it's just a constant thing of them letting people know the understanding that we trust God in this situation above all. Mm-hmm. We're going to do what we personally can to help you, and they do. They sacrifice money, all those kind of things. But the idea is, above everything else, we believe in God helping us in this. And so we want you to know that that's our first thing we do. Mm-hmm. Our first thing, we're going to do whatever we can to help you. They have long discussions on what they personally can do. But what they want everyone to know, and is so amazing to me, is we trust God above all, and we're going to pray over this before we do anything else.
Yep. In verse 15, the prayer of the faith will save the sick.
Yeah.
And we wholeheartedly believe that, and we pray to that end, and I know our elders pray to that end, that those who are struggling will be aided by God in a way that we cannot help them.
Yeah, without a doubt. We don't want to skip over a pretty interesting part of verse 14, though, before we get that, because James does give a specific statement here that I think is often overlooked, or maybe not often overlooked, we just don't talk about it much, that the elders of the church should pray over them, but what they're supposed to do while they pray over them is anointing them with oil in the name of the Lord. Now, I have actually personally seen or heard, I wasn't present when it happened, but know of several instances where elders have actually, like a person who needed prayers was sick, actually ask elders to bring the oil and anoint them with oil to pray over them. One thing that's important to understand is in this time period, oil was seen as like one of the main healing properties that was there. So going along with understanding there are things on this earth that can help you along with your faith in God, I think is the main purpose of understanding that there are things on this earth that God has given us, whether it be through knowledge of medicines or even the oils that He gives us naturally, need to be used as well. So, there has never been a a better advertising campaign for essential oils than James 5:14, right? Because what are those essential oils? I mean, everybody knows what essential oils are, because if someone sells essential oils, they make sure everybody knows what it is and that they're selling them, right? But the idea behind it is these oils make these natural things happen within your body that is similar to the idea of what James is talking about here. It's therapeutic, that these oils are therapeutic and do it. But realizing that God is okay with you bringing these things that He's given to you and using those along with your prayer and fervent belief in Him.
Yeah. Jacob and I talked about this morning, maybe yesterday, it doesn't matter, about what's gone on, right, with trying to come up with a vaccine, the virus.
Right.
And it's amazing that God has given us the mental ability, not me, Jacob,
right,
but some of our more learned individuals in our culture, has given us the mental ability to develop the technology to do something like that.
Yeah.
You think about what modern medicine has accomplished, and the idea that that's a gift from God, that He gave us that knowledge and that ability, that we were able to get away from bloodletting, right?
Right.
I mean, That's quite an advancement, isn't it?
It is.
That we can go out and mimic a virus to the point that our body can use its natural ability to immunize itself against it. It's fascinating that God's given us that ability.
I think, so often, I remember probably longer than I would like to admit, when I read this verse, I was thinking, man, you just go get some canola oil and splash it on him as you pray over.
It's got to be Wesson oil, though.
Wesson,
right?
yeah, there you go, Wesson oil. But that's not the oil in our minds. Often is not what James is speaking of. A thing of that time that is used as a healing property of medicine. And I think sometimes we overlook that, and we'll say, well, if you're going to use, in mental health is where we've seen this the most, right? That we feel like, well, if you're having these issues, you need to pray more or do more. And the point James makes is, yes, prayer has to be your number one thing, and it has to be the biggest part of what you're doing. But adding things with prayer that's been given to us is not only okay, it's what you should do.
Yeah.
It's the obvious thing that you should do. And it doesn't take away from your faith that God is going to heal. These people are praying, feeling that they are, and yet they're still using this property, this enhancement, that's this medicine of the time, along with their prayer. And I think that's something that's so important that we need to understand in all health aspects, but especially with mental health at this point.
So to put a bow on that conversation, if you have a cold, pray to God and take your NyQuil.
Definitely.
Right?
Or, well, we probably got too many, but I can guarantee you, if you go on Facebook for 2 minutes, you'll find an essential oil for it.
Hey, no, that's true.
No doubt.
That's true. Verse 16, confess your trespasses to one another and pray for one another that you will be healed. The effective fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. I almost went to the King James there. I'm reading from the New King James.
Man.
Yeah,
you got to do availeth.
Availeth almost came out of my mouth.
You got
I've heard
to.
Steve mention that before. I still quote King James pretty heavily if I don't think about it. So he's dealt with the physical, and he goes right to the spiritual, and they're treated the same way, right? If we're dealing with something physical, we tell our brothers and sisters, we tell the elders, they pray over us. If we're dealing with something spiritual, we tell our brothers and sisters, we tell the elders, and they pray over us.
Yeah.
And that's something that is so difficult for us at times because pride gets in the way. We talked in our growth group meeting this week after the second judgment lesson about how so often people's outside view of the church is that we have everything together. We don't struggle with things because we portray that. That's what we show. We come in here on a Sunday morning, we have worship service, we come to Bible class, and we can look like, especially to an outsider who doesn't have a personal relationship with anybody here, that we're a bunch of people who have everything together. Mm-hmm. And it could not be further from the truth. We're a bunch of people who are trying to get our lives in line with God's expectation, but it's tough. And so having our ability to humble ourselves, to confess what we deal with, to lean on our brothers and sisters, not only does that help us as the sinner, not only does that help our brothers and sisters who might be dealing with the same thing, but they're too timid to share it, that also helps people who are outside the church, who need to see the church for what it is, which is a bunch of sick people trying to get better, not a bunch of well people trying to stay there.
You know, when you look, that's so true. And when you look at this idea of the effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much, and him saying that after putting these two perspectives, both physical and spiritual, just the importance of having people in your life that believe in prayer and are willing to submit their lives to God in belief to that prayer, in belief to that God. And you know, I always tell people whenever I read this verse that a story comes to mind. We've gone to New Mexico several times now on our old church bus, and before we would leave out, typically everyone would be like, you know, we're praying for you to have a safe trip, praying for everything to go well. And the first year, it was good. The second year, we had a tire blow out. We had a window knocked out. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. Well, the next year, people still came up, prayed, said, we're praying for you. And we had like 6 blowouts and all kinds of things. Finally made it back. The next year we went, people came up and said, hey, we're praying for you to have a safe trip. And I said, look, pray something else. You're not righteous enough. Go work on your righteousness before you're going to say those prayers, because it ain't accomplishing anything right now. Obviously, that's a funny way to look at it. But what James is calling us to do is, one, to confess for our spiritual lives and our physical lives, but to have people in our lives that believe in the power of prayer and believe that God works through prayer.
I always find it refreshing when we as a congregation pray for someone, whether it be a physical need, a spiritual need, and then there's an acknowledgement from that individual after the fact.
Yeah.
Not saying it's bad if it's not acknowledged, right?
Yes.
But it's always nice to see the resolution of whatever
Right.
we've been praying for.
Definitely.
And when we hear time and again, people will call up here, will write cards, will thank the elders for praying over them because they've seen the fruit of that prayer.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's difficult when we're praying for someone to ultimately see the fruit, to see the
Right.
end of that, to see God's will at work.
Yeah.
And it's such a wonderful thing to see.
It is.
At the same time, Jacob, maybe it wasn't those praying for you. Maybe it was you.
Well, we're not going to let you judge me in that way.
Oh, okay. All right.
To,
That's probably
according to
a
verse 9.
Yeah.
There, so.
So to wrap it up, he uses the example of Elijah. And I like how he starts out with, hey, look, guys, Elijah was someone just like you and me.
Yeah.
He had a huge portion of God's Spirit. He had half the portion that Elisha had.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You want some fascinating reading, go read the miracles of Elisha.
Man, no doubt.
They're fascinating and a little bit confusing.
Yes,
Why
no
we're floating
doubt.
ag's heads out of rivers is beyond me. But anyway,
Hey.
he says, but Elijah was a man just like you, and yet he prayed, and it didn't rain for 3.5 years. And he prayed again, and here comes the rain. And James is using this point, again, to those who understand Jewish history, saying, look, if this can be accomplished through prayer, what more can you accomplish for your brothers and sisters, or can they accomplish for you if you'll just humble yourself enough to ask for prayers, and if you will pray for those who have humbled themselves as well. I always keep that in mind when someone has come forward to ask for prayers, or someone has called Sarah in the office and asked to have a prayer included in the bulletin. That's a pretty humble thing to do, right? It's not always the easiest to call and ask for people to pray for you because you have a need. And I try to keep that in mind as I'm praying for individuals who have asked. Say, look, if they can humble themselves enough to ask, then I can pray fervently that God's will be done in their lives.
No doubt. And as you go into his final statement, my brethren, if any among you strays from the truth and one turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save the soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. I don't think it's an accident that James says this after what he's just told everyone, because I think it's a call in the same way that Jesus does when it comes to Matthew 7 and making judgments and removing the speck out of your brother's eye. Not that we aren't supposed to remove the speck out of our brother's eye, but that we are involved enough in their lives that they know that we care enough about them, they trust us enough that we can get into their eyes and correct it whenever it's needed. We can get close enough because we've removed everything from ourselves. They trust us enough that we can get in there close, and we're gentle enough that we can take something out of their eye. What that's going to do for them is unimaginable. But the only way you can do that is if you have the relationship with them that correction can come out of.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Correction, like you said, in a very gentle and sensitive way. And I've never thought about that. Literally the imagery of trying to pull a speck out of someone's eye, the care that's taken there. It's much the same way when we're trying to work with someone who has fallen into sin, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen to us. It's going to happen to those around us. And having the awareness to see it happening, the relationship to approach the issue, and to approach it in such a way that it will be well received.
I mean, when Jesus speaks of that, the easiest way for me that has got that into my head is obviously when we have something in our eye, we do typically one of two things. The first thing we do is probably go look in the mirror, right, and see if we can get it ourselves. And when that doesn't work, we go to someone, either a professional or a righteous person we trust. That's Hunter Scaife for me on both counts.
There you
right?
go. Yeah.
But we go to those people because we trust that they're going to be able to take care of that problem and aid us in that problem. But what's more important is if someone is so in tune with you that if your eye's red in water and they're willing to say, hey, there might be something wrong with your eye, let me get in there and see. And I think that's the point James is trying to make, that you are so in tune, and there's so much trust in that you don't have to swear that your intentions are good. They know your intentions are good. If they're not willing to come to you and ask for these prayers, either spiritually or physically, that you're in tune with them enough that you can notice it, and that you can be gentle enough that they're going to allow you to notice it and come in and help them.
Mm-hmm. For my part, and I've said this already, but I've thoroughly enjoyed this study.
Yeah.
It's a bit self-fulfilling because we picked this study
Right.
in James, and it's something that I love. But James, again, he's so practical. He's so direct. He's the type of individual that I think we all need in our lives. What, again, with closing with those last few remarks, someone that can be gentle but can be direct. You can say, hey, look, Jake, you've got to correct this. This is not what God would have. And I hope and I pray for everyone in our family here at Robinson and Center that we can adopt that same attitude, that we can be involved with one another enough to know when there's something wrong, and that we can be humble enough to both address it and then to have it addressed in our lives when we fall short.
Definitely. Ditto. I agree.
All right.
All counts.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We don't get to see you necessarily, but we know that there are several of you. You've made some comments. Several of you that are participating with us every week, and we really do appreciate that. Like I say, we do enjoy this. Not to say we don't want to get back to full-on Bible classes,
Right.
but we do enjoy this and being able to offer this this type of study as well. We hope that you have a wonderful morning of worship. We hope to get to see you. If we don't get to see you and you're worshiping with us on live stream, then we are prayerful for you. We hope that at some point things will get to the point where you can get back with us and can worship with us in person again.
Definitely. Appreciate you guys. Love you guys. We'll see you hopefully in a little bit.
Thank you.